Chris Hensley is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer member of FINRA SIPC, investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc., a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Houston First Financial Group are not affiliated.
The Houston Midtown chapter of the Society for Financial Awareness presents Money Matters with your host, Christopher Hensley.
Good morning, everybody. You're listening to KPFT Houston. I'm Chris Hensley. The time is now 11 a.m. We've got a great show lined up for you today. Robots are coming for your job. Regardless of your profession, degree, or experience, there is no escaping the automated future. However, you can take steps today that will help you not only survive, but thrive in this new economy. Our guest today is author John Pugliano. He is the host of a podcast and the author of the book, The Robots Are Coming. So we'll do a deep dive into automation, into his book, as well as some other things there. So keep listening, stay tuned. We've got a great show lined up for you. But if you are a longtime listener, you do know we always reserve just the first few minutes of the show to tell you a little bit about what's going on in the Houston and the Gulf Coast region when it comes to financial literacy. And we are here in February of 2019. You've heard me talk about Houston Money Week, which is in April of 2019, and we are getting closer and closer to that event. Now, as we get closer to Houston Money Week, a lot of the events that we are doing with partner organizations start coming online there. I would encourage you to check out the website, www.houstonmoneyweek.org, and not Saturday, not tomorrow, but the week after that, I will be doing a talk out at the Houston Hispanic Forum Career and Education Day. That is an event that I believe starts at 8 a.m. and goes all the way to 3 p.m. Now, I'm just going to be doing one of the breakout sessions on college planning, so this one is geared towards parents. But what's really neat about this event, and I've done this, I want to say this is year 3 or 4 for this event, is it's huge. If you are here in the Houston area, you know the George Brown Convention Center is from one side of the city block to the other side. It is a gigantic building, and this event takes up almost half of the building. So just kind of paint a picture for you there that it's not just the Houston area. They bus in kids, high school age, middle school age from all over Texas to talk about college planning, to talk about career panels. Some of the career panels that they've had in the past are the FBI, NASA, STEM, science, technology. So it's a very interesting stuff that I said, I didn't have that available when I was a teenager, but really neat panels and that sort of thing. And then, of course, the one that I'm doing is on college planning, and we've got Wen Fong, who's been on the show in the past. She is doing one as well. And one more Houston Money Week partner that's escaping my mind right now, but we will all be there on Saturday morning. Now, the good thing about this is it's free. It is open to the public. There's no charge for this. In fact, Houston Metro Bus has made it free to ride the bus to the event, if that's one of the ways that you're getting there. They do provide lunch as well, so a pretty big event. For more details on that, I would encourage you to go to the website HispanicForum.org, and right now they've got a big splash page on there about the event. With that, let's go ahead and get John on the line here. John, are you there?
I'm here, Chris.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be on your show.
Well, so usually I'll start the show kind of the same way and introduce you to the audience, but you've got so much stuff going on. You've got the book, you've got the wealth management firm, you've got the podcast. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself so listeners can get to know you a little bit better?
Sure. Well, I'm a podcast host. I do something called the Wealthsteading Podcast. I've been doing that for, I don't know, 5 years, I guess. That's where I really have just talked about people, how I've built my own personal wealth. I'm someone that comes from a blue-collar background, joined the Marine Corps when I was 17 years old, and took a really circuitous path to eventually being an entrepreneur and becoming financially independent. So, I don't offer financial planning services or anything like that. I'm strictly a money manager with private accounts that I handle, and just work with a select group of clients. But on the podcast, I just basically tell people what I'm doing, what I'm buying, what I'm selling, what I'm interested in, my hobbies, things like that. All this kind of led me to writing the book. A few years ago, I was approached by a publisher wanting me to write an investment book, and I said, look, there's a million investment books out there. I don't know that I have anything to add to that. Let me write on a very timely topic, which is automation. And so that's kind of how I got into writing the book. It's called The Robots Are Coming, and the key part of it is it's called A Human Survival Guide to Profiting in the Age of Automation. And I titled it that way because I really do think that over the future, I don't know if it's going to be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, what it's going to be, right? I can't predict the future, but I think that we are going to see some real impacts to the job market with automation. I think it's going to particularly hit white-collar professionals more so than people are thinking. And, I don't know, I'm not predicting a zombie apocalypse kind of thing, but I think it's going to be pretty severe. But the point of that is that there's a ways to survive, and I think it's going to be a great time actually for people that are entrepreneurs, people that are very self-sufficient, people that are real go-getters. I think they're going to use the same tools that the corporations are going to use to replace employees can be used by the entrepreneurs and the creative people to create their own businesses.
Absolutely. So a couple of things there. So we're going to dive into the Robots Are Coming, the book, the topic of automation. But on the podcast, I'll have a link to your podcast. And if listeners would like to hear more about that, I have to control myself because being an active manager, we could go all day just talking about that part of it. So I want us to kind of stick to this, and maybe we could throw some of that at the end. But one of the things that you mentioned was automation resulting in mass unemployment. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to. I'm not someone that really tries to hype things, so I don't want to predict all kinds of gloom and doom. But I just look at what the smart people are saying. If you look at everybody from Bill Gates to Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, all these people over the last couple of years have been talking about severe unemployment being caused by automation, by robotics. They've talked about even perhaps looking at guaranteed minimum incomes or things of that nature. So, I don't know when it's going to come, but I think if you just look at history and you look at the way technology has been applied in the past, you can see that same thing will happen now. And, to kind of give you some background, Chris, I don't know how old you are. I'm going to be 58 this year, so I've been around a while. I can remember in the 1970s, pretty much the 1970s when I was growing up outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The reason I joined the Marine Corps was because all the mills were closing. I lived in an area where there were steel mills and light manufacturing, coal mines, railroads. All those things were being shut down because the jobs were being exported to Japan. Back in the day, Japan was the enemy, not China. All the jobs were going to Japan, and men that were 50 years old that had worked in the coal mine and the steel mill all their life, all of a sudden they're without a job and they didn't have any transferable skills. And that same thing happened to the 1960s and 70s. It happened to women that were, secretaries. You used to remember the secretarial pools, and they used to have typewriters and stenographers and all these type of things that, technology eventually replaced that. And so those same things I think are going to happen to a great degree now with white-collar jobs. Mid-level managers, things like enterprise software are going to be able to come in and do a lot of the work that a traditional mid-level manager has done, and I think it's going to hit even other professionals. We're seeing it in the law firms. A lot of the kind of junior level law jobs, the research type law jobs, are being done now with machine learning and artificial intelligence. I think you'll eventually see it in areas of medicine. It's going to hit the areas where the professionals are paid the most, and the the task can be done through a repetitive and a predictable outcome. So if you're a pediatrician and you're diagnosing kids for strep throat, well, someday we're going to be able to blow into our smartphone and it's going to tell you whether you have strep throat or not. These devices that can do diagnostics and sensors are getting so inexpensive that we're not there now, but we will be at that point where you won't need to go to the emergency room to find out if you're having a heart attack, or you won't need to go to the doctor's office to see if you have strep throat. You'll be able to do those things remotely or at home. Excuse me, or at home. And so I think a lot of those type jobs that people aren't considering now as being, people are talking about, hamburger flipping jobs, and those things will be replaced. Well, sure, they will be. But I think the biggest impact is going to come to the white collar and the professional workers.
So that's very, very good points that you made there. And you said quite a bit. So let me back up there. It's not just something that you feel. You're looking at the smart money, and you cited things like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, and where they've actually kind of plugged in, and they're already talking about this. And the idea that it's not just going to be the hamburger flippers, as you say, but really looking at things like medicine and law firms, where we've already seen some of that mid-level management start to become automated. So this is definitely something that people should have on their radars. Now let's do the flip side of that, because you also said where it could be negative, it could also be great for entrepreneurs and craftsmen. Explain a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think the good news in all that is that, in the old economies, you had to have a lot of capital equipment. There were a lot of barriers to entry to entrepreneurs getting into a particular field. You couldn't just go out and start your own railroad. You can't just go out and start your own, manufacturing facility. But you can do that today, and in the future, I think you're going to be able to do that more and more because of things like automation, the 3D printing, other types of distributive type manufacturing are going to make it possible for people, say an engineer that has a great idea, he's not necessarily going to have to work for a firm that would have hired him in the past to manufacture his product. He can just create his own and perhaps have his own enterprise that manufactures it for him, or use manufacturing facilities, offshoring type things. And we've already seen a lot of that happen in the last 20 years, where people are having products made obviously in Asia and brought into the United States. But a lot of it still has been at the corporate level. I think you're going to be able to see individual entrepreneurs doing that for themselves. And how you see people selling things on Amazon or whatever, they're basically just shipping products. Right. But they're skirting the middleman retailers. I think you're going to be able to see the actual creative people that create the products do that more and more in the future. And not only that, but even just a local handyman, a guy that's a plumber or electrician. In the past, he may have needed to work for a firm to be able to market his abilities or to have the right contacts. Again, going forward, I think because the cost of data, the cost of all these things are so inexpensive, that he'll be able to focus on what he's great at, whatever it is, maybe builds furniture, or again, he's a really good electrician. He'll be able to focus on that skill because he can automate all the back-end office processes that he would have had in the past and worked for a corporation.
So while there are bitter things, it's also bittersweet, because there are things that can help. Some of those layers are going to go away where people can directly market, that they can take advantage of some of the automation. So that's definitely on the plus side. Well, let's talk about, if we were talking about stocks, which we're not, but if we were talking about stocks, we would talk about things like stop losses and things to insulate against risk. If you were looking at the negative side of this, of the automation, what would you tell people who are trying to insulate against that risk?
Yeah, well, on the negative side, I'll tell you, in some ways, I think, and Chris, I think you probably agree with me on this. People are their own worst enemies when it comes to investing and panicking at the wrong time, right? What's Warren Buffett say? You should be greedy when other people are fearful, and fearful when other people are greedy. So So I think one thing people should do is they should step back and know that this isn't going to happen all at once tomorrow. So it isn't like, panic today, and to look for opportunities. But one of the sections of my book is called, and the book is written in, again, this is because I can't predict the future, right? I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know exactly what's going to happen. I didn't want to write the book where I specifically said X, Y, Z is going to occur. What I tried to do is I wrote the book in 4 sections, right? I want people to learn to think for themselves. And so I talk about things like, think like an investor, think like an entrepreneur. And in the section where I talk about thinking like an investor, I mentioned that, the biggest mistake they can have is in speculation. And if you think back to, whether it was in the 1800s with the railroads, where everybody jumped on to the speculation of railroad stocks are going to keep going up forever, and they all piled into railroad stocks. Or, we saw the same thing play out last year with Bitcoin,
yep.
where all these people piled into Bitcoin. And I wrote the book in 2016, so it wasn't Bitcoin is mentioned in the book, but it wasn't on my radar as that there was going to be a big Bitcoin bubble like that. But I talk in the book about avoid these speculations. Think like an investor. Don't think like a speculator. And so don't rush in to buy the latest 3D printer stock, or don't rush in to buy the latest, even marijuana stock or whatever it is. Focus more on companies that produce products and services that are likely to, be generating income into the future, and they're not a hyped type product. So, that would be the first thing, is to not get caught up in hype, because everything that comes out dealing with artificial intelligence or machine learning, all these companies are going to try and hype it. And in fact, I'll tell you, one of the stocks that I don't own it anymore, but I had owned it last year, that I think is going to be had extensive benefits from robotics. It's a big Fortune 500 type company. They don't have anything to do with robotics, and it's Starbucks. I've always said that when I look at all the companies in the S&P 500, the one that I think that can immediately add profits and revenue to their bottom line would be Starbucks when they start implementing robotics. Because right now you can go off the shelf, buy a robot that mixes up a really good latte or cappuccino or whatever the heck they sell at Starbucks. You don't need the baristas to do that. And again, this isn't revolutionary technology. It's off the shelf. It's very easy. It would be a huge. I think if you look at Starbucks, their bottom line, probably 60% of their cost of running their business is employees, and so robotics would be a huge impact to Starbucks' bottom line. So I think you have to kind of think outside the box in some of these companies. The other side of that is too that doesn't mean that Starbucks is necessarily going to lay off their whole workforce either, because Starbucks needs to create their next generation and move from beyond just selling coffee. And so you're seeing them get into more adult beverages and trying to move into certain types of high quality foods. By eliminating the baristas from having to mix those drinks and work so feverishly to make that happen, they're going to free up that human capital to do other things.
That's I'm smiling right now because I could just imagine the opportunity there for other things. We don't know what those are, but that human ingenuity, being able to open it up, it will be interesting to see. So you said quite a bit there. One, it's not going to happen all at once. It's not something that immediately is going to happen tomorrow. But I do like the idea when you said think like an investor. Speculation is not necessarily a good thing, and we talked about the Bitcoin. Those marijuana stocks that we, as a financial advisor, those are the two main things I think of when I think about fly-by-night things that have happened overnight. Doesn't mean that they won't make money, but it's those red flags when you hear more than 5 family members and an uncle and a brother ask you about the CBD stocks. That's a red flag to me. So
absolutely.
But then also creating that next generation. So when you do see things like Starbucks start to automate that naturally when there's a disruption, there's going to be, if they have to adapt, and it could lead to other things that we have not even thought about. So that's something to think there. Now, I kind of wanted to pivot for a moment, because one of the things you talked about as well in the email that you sent me was kind of manufacturing in Texas and Louisiana. Now, we don't have a long time here. We've got about 10 minutes or so, but maybe talk a little bit about that as well.
Sure, and this really goes to automation and robotics, big data, all the things that, the Internet of Things, all the buzzwords that you hear. This is all impacting the state of Texas, and particularly the Gulf Coast, probably more than anywhere in the world. I really think Houston is the epicenter for all this. And what I mean by that is, look at the impact that's happened with shale oil. Natural gas and the oil that's coming out of the shale fields, that isn't because that isn't occurring because we discovered new sources of natural gas or oil. It's happening because automation and computer learning and robotics and big data and all these things have been applied to geology and the geophysics of petroleum engineering. And so when it isn't just the original fracking started, I think, in 1946. Fracking itself has been around a long time, but the reason it has had such an impact over the last decade is because all these automation and big data have come together to really synergize it. And now we're not only able to go into old oil fields and regenerate them with these techniques, but we can even go into the shale fields and other places where the oil was locked up. We knew it was there, we just couldn't access it because we didn't have the technology. And if you remember in 2008, oil was about $145, $147 a barrel. People were talking about peak oil. We're going to run out of oil, blah blah blah. Well, here we are. Now the United States is an exporter of oil. We're the largest producer of oil in the world. I think we're approaching. We're over 11 million barrels a day. I think approaching 12 million barrels a day now. But that's because of robotics. I mean, you can think of that drill when we're going down and doing horizontal drilling now. That's because there's basically a robot on the end of that drill bit, right? In the old days, we just had to go down and drill vertical wells. If you missed it, you had to pick up your rig and move it and drill again. Now they can drill in one spot vertically, go down a mile, and then shoot out horizontally in all types of directions for miles. And that's only come about because of robotics and automation. And as a result of that, your area, the Gulf Coast area, is just booming. I mean, the pipelines that are being built, the cheap sources of energy. We're looking now with even with the recent increases in natural gas, was about, I think, $3 a thousand BTU. You look at the price of that in Asia, it's probably $10. So the difference in energy costs for the United States are immense. It's going to give us such a competitive edge that places like Texas, Louisiana, I really think these manufacturing jobs are going to return to these areas, and not necessarily like President Trump thinks with making America great, with bringing back all the jobs to America. I think the manufacturing is going to come back to these areas, and even in Gulf Coast areas where it didn't even exist before, because of the energy is there and it's so inexpensive. But a lot of those jobs are going to be done by robots. So when you take the cheap labor element out of it, because it'll be done with automation, you don't need someone in Vietnam or someone in Bangladesh. You can have a robot doing it, right there in Louisiana or Texas, where you have very, very inexpensive oil, some of the most, the cheapest energy on the face of the planet. Those factories are going to be built right on the wellheads, right on the source and the natural gas and the oil, and you're already seeing that with all the, with all the chemical plants and the petrochemical cracking facilities that they're either building there now or refurbishing the old ones. It's a great renaissance, and I think you guys are really in the epicenter of it. So it's not going to create the hundreds of thousands of jobs maybe that it would have in the days of the 1960s when we had big General Motors type factories. The factories are going to be dark, where they talk about dark factories, meaning the lights are off, there's going to be a lot of automation, but that's still going to create an immense amount of jobs for high-skilled workers. And people to support all this type of facilities. So I'm very positive about your area of the country in particular.
Absolutely. So, if we had this conversation 5-10 years ago, we would be talking about outsourcing, and now we've kind of flipped that on its head, and we're talking about automation. Completely different ballgame there.
Yeah, and in fact, if we'd have said the same thing 6 years ago, people would have thought we were crazy. Absolutely, they're absolutely crazy. We're running out of oil. The manufacturing costs are too expensive in the United States. All the future's in China. Teach your kids how to speak Mandarin. I mean, that's kind of the philosophy, and I don't believe that at all. I think that the United States is blessed with a lot of geology that's hard to replace. The natural resources we have, the river networks, the big oceans on the east and west coasts, and then of course the Gulf of Mexico down where you're at. It just gives us a competitive advantage that, from a geological standpoint, is hard to beat. And if people think back, for some people that are kind of doubting this, if you think back 30 years ago, data was very expensive. If you wanted to research something, you had to go to a library. You had to get all these books in print. There was no access to data like we have today, and so consequently, over these last 30 years, data has basically become free. Information is virtually free right now. The same thing in the future will happen with labor. It's hard to conceptualize that, but in the future, automation will become so inexpensive that labor will become virtually free. And so you won't make your living by the sweat of your brow in terms of the labor, the muscle jobs. If you look in the United States, the manly kind of muscle jobs have been in decline since 1957. It's been more using your brains, using your creativity, and that, I think, will continue into the future and just ultimately make it very good for people that can tie those systems together.
So we are speaking with John Pugliano, and he is the author of The Robots Are Coming, A Human Survival Guide to Profiting in the Age of Automation. We've got just a few minutes before before the end of the show here. John, one of the things that you mentioned in the email, and since we do financial literacy here in Houston, you talk about kind of a pet peeve that you have when people call their business a side hustle or a gig. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's a lot. The big buzzword now too is side hustles and people doing these gigs. And I encourage people to become more entrepreneurial, because again, in the future, I think that's the way it's going to be. It's not. We may have less jobs in the future, but there won't be less work. Right? There'll still be opportunities to work, and it'll be maybe around creating your own enterprise. And so I hear a lot of people though that have their side hustle or their gig going on, and they talk about driving for Uber. That's their side hustle. Well, that isn't a side hustle. Driving for Uber is just a part-time job. We used to call that moonlighting.
Right.
If you're really going to create your side hustle and you want it to be viable, you need to realistically look at that and decide if it's something sustainable in the future that you can create a real income from and make a real business enterprise out of it. And quit calling it a side hustle. Call it a job, call it an enterprise, call it a small business, and take it seriously, and put pencil to paper or get on your spreadsheet and calculate exactly what your costs of doing business are, what your cost of goods sold are, and are you making a profit, and how can you make that profit create a lifestyle for you where you're generating your whole income from that business. I just think people don't take it seriously enough.
I love it. I couldn't agree more. Put the responsibility back on them. Somehow, if you call it a side hustle, it's when you said moonlighting, we're like, yeah, you're doing a second job or possibly a business here. And
if you're still working for somebody else, it's still the man, right? It's just it's the man in a different form.
Exactly. Well, John, thank you so much for joining us today. For listeners who'd like to find out more about John, I will have a link to the book as well as the podcast. John, what's the best website for people to find out more information about you?
Just the podcast website, wealthsteading.com. That's the easy place they can find me. It's on iTunes and all the normal places. The episodes are out there on the website. They'll find me if they want to find me.
Perfect, John. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Chris, I appreciate it. Thanks so much. Happy to
have a great
come
weekend.
Back again.
Have a good one.
Take care.
And you have been listening to KPFT Houston.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Money Matters Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, visit us on the web at www.moneymatterspodcast.com. Drop us a line on SpeakPipe on the right-hand corner. It will receive any voicemails, questions, thoughts, concerns that you have about the show. In addition to this, we recently launched a Patreon campaign. Click on the Donate Now tab to hit the tip jar and find out what Patreon's campaign is all about.